Okay, so welcome everyone to the Mindshield podcast, where psychology, neuroscience, and cybersecurity and technology converge to solve for one of the biggest challenges of our time, which is protecting the human mind in the digital world. I'm your host, Shimona Banerjee, and in each of these episodes, we bring together brilliant minds from scientists to psychologists to cyber leaders and innovators to explore how exponential technologies shape behavior, security, and society as a whole. This is not just about defending networks, it's about defending people. And I'm really excited to dive in with Andrew Townley here. Andrew Townley helps executives of Global 500 eliminate the hidden delays and failures that silently drain millions in revenue each year. His work reframes cybersecurity not as a technical afterthought, but as a driver of business outcomes, focused on turning the crisis of delay into sustainable competitive advantage for companies. Andrew is also the creator of models like the collapse retraction model, which we will be diving into a bit today, and the universal system governance integrity model, which is designed to help leaders redefine the very rules of security. And if I may say so, his mission is very simple but profound, which is to unlock the soul of security and finally start winning. Really great to have you on this session with us.
Thank you, Shimona. Glad to be here.
So I want to start with telling the audience a little bit about who you are and what the most pivotal points in your journey have been that you decided to navigate and pivot away from the traditional way that these systems of security and governance are practiced and start looking for new solutions. And where has that brought you to today?
Okay. Well, I suppose I pivoted away from it in part because I never started there. My background is actually in technology. And so I have a computer science degree, and I did quality assurance and consulting and software development and system architecture, large scale architecture, enterprise architecture. And I used to be kind of in charge of how to structure the delivery. I mean, I wasn't the project manager, but I was the technical design authority for major, like 30 million, 40 million. I advised on projects up to $500 million. And so if you are the person who is sort of the final say on things, you can't really do that without dealing with security. So one of the things that I had to do was, in terms of integrating some of the things that we were doing at the time in terms of service-oriented architecture, it was an e-government project, and so privacy and security were very big, and that was one of the main problems: interoperability of identity between government departments, authentication for personal, financial revenue submissions, and being able to, get your tax details and get your identity and whatever else at the national level. So, it's not like, oh, I'm going to log into this website. It's like I'm actually accessing aspects of my entire citizen identity. And so that's kind of where I got really more focused on security and started speaking at security conferences based on some of the things we were doing, because I was the one who actually took the federated identity management stuff at the time and then integrated that into the model that we had. And then I ended up talking about that in security conferences all over the world, and then presenting our approach to the US CIO Council for the US government CIO Council for how we were doing federated identity and, e-government interoperability and things like that. So that was kind of where I did that. And then I suppose in parallel, in around 2004, because all this was kind of happening about the same time, I got really interested in leadership and management, and I wanted to dive into that in more detail. So that's kind of when I was exposed to the work of Peter Sengdier first, and systems thinking, because I mean, I'd always intuitively done it, but that was kind of my introduction. And I took that from there and then kind of integrated it with psychology based on just curiosity initially. And then some life things kind of made it a necessity. So I don't do things by halves. If I'm really interested or I think that there's something of value in a discipline or an area, then I kind of do a deep dive immersion and go as deep as I can and learn as much and kind of the full spectrum of whatever it is. And so that's kind of the way it was over time. Just I was interested in people and how people worked and what made people in society work and philosophy and history and economics and all those things. So it all just over time kind of the more I learned, the more I saw the patterns. And it's like, well, this group is talking about this thing, and this group are talking about this thing, and 80% of it overlaps. They just use different words. So then part of the way I see the world is I see those patterns and connections, and then I just kind of started knitting this stuff together. And I mean, I didn't do it to solve security. I was just trying to figure out the world.
You're trying to figure out the world. That's an intense thing to figure out. So if I understand from what you just said, security was never really your area of focus.
No.
You've always been really interested in working in the governance, business, people management space, and security just happens to be something that lies and that's central to how those systems currently work. And what you noticed while you were working in these environments was because of your background in systems thinking and your interest in psychology, that there were problems that exist that slow systems down, that build inefficiencies, that create misalignment and problems. And I'm assuming that's what piqued your interest in trying to put these dots together and come up with a model to make something work better. What I'm curious about is what is that one core problem that you observed that you felt like you were trying to and are currently trying to solve?
Well, I suppose it kind of comes back to, I mean, I don't even remember now, but it was probably early 2000s or something after I kind of got out of consulting and started doing other things, working for different companies and things like that before starting my own company. But that was really because I was brought in as the architect to solve a new system deployment. But basically, the company that I was working for, they were a manual based data processing. Um, I mean, they had like hundreds of people just doing data entry all day. That's all they did. And so my boss at the time was from Oracle, and we were talking about how to do this. And he was, I was coming up with, because I was still at that point kind of technology focused more so than anything else, because I mean, that was my area of expertise. That's what I'd done. And so we were having some conversations about how to do this. And I was talking about all the technical things. And he's like, well, one, we're smaller and we don't have that kind of budget. And two, I have people. If it's going to be slow and inefficient, we don't need perfect tech. We just need a system that works together. And that was kind of one of those, offhand comments, light bulb moments that it's like, well, actually, yeah, this is what business is all about. Business isn't about, tech exists for a purpose. And then so that kind of started the rest of, the awareness that, well, if we're solving any problem, security or availability or delivery or whatever, it's got to account for this whole system. And the majority of the system is actually around people. The technology is a facilitator and an amplifier and an accelerator, but you can't solve the whole problem with technology ever. And so I suppose that was one of the things that really kind of integrated enough into my thinking so that when we were talking about identity problems or we're talking about even today with all of the explosion of threats and cyber problems and breaches and whatever, it's like, well, yeah, but it's not a technology problem that exists as part of a larger system. And so what is going on in the larger system? What are the people doing? Not necessarily what their motivations are, but what are the things that are happening? What are the events? What are the constraints? What are the decisions people are being asked to make that actually contribute to this problem? And unless you understand that and understand that's actually where the leverage is, you're not going to solve it with technology. But what we do as an industry, and especially since I sort of veered into security somewhat by accident since around 2010 or so, I got a little bit more focused based on some other things and relationships that I had and opportunities that took me there. um, it's like we're trying to solve these security problems, but we're trying to do it exactly the same way we've always done it. And over time, I've looked into this pretty closely, again, from the whole ecosystem, socioeconomic, psychology, human behavior, technology integration mesh point of view. And it's like, well, of course it's the way it is, because that's the only way it can be, because that's the decisions everybody makes. That's what everybody's trying to do. We're trying to do the same things we've always done, faster with different tech or with more people, but we haven't actually changed the fundamental thinking. While the way the world works and the way people interact with each other and the speed of connectivity and the communication and access people have, that has changed, but our thinking has not. And that's actually the core of my argument against the entire industry. Actually, I didn't really set out to try and change the industry, but I recognized finally a couple of years ago that, well, duh, that's if you're going to actually do the things at scale that you've done individually with clients, well, that's actually what you're talking about. So you either recognize it and own it, or you kind of just pretend that's not it and try to solve individual problems. So again, I don't really do things by half. So I finally owned it and said, okay, well, this is what I'm going to talk about.
So you're taking on the entire cybersecurity industry and trying to bring a shift in the paradigm on some fundamental principles on which this entire industry and all the solutions and all the technologies have been built over so many years. What would you say? Yeah, is that correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say? So I have two questions regarding that. One is, what would you say are some of the key underlying assumptions that this industry is based on that seem to be flawed or maybe irrelevant or maybe even meaningless to modern security? And my second part of the question is, when we had this conversation, and we've been talking about this for quite a while now, it's so deep and it's beautiful. You When I asked you how do you want to actually title this topic, you said unlocking the soul of security. And that's a very powerful phrase. What do you mean by soul of security? And why have we lost it?
Okay. So in reverse order is probably the best way to do this. So what I believe the soul of security is, I mean, you have to, we have a very technical and narrow view of what security is. And this is the mantra of the industry. And I mean, when I was aware that I was responsible for security and I had to make all of the different expert areas across all the different, networks and systems and whatever work. Of course, I read the same stuff. I mean, the CISSP I had to get because my boss told me that one of the junior people got it and you don't have it, so you've got to have it too. So, I read Anderson and I read, all of the fundamental core works about what security is in the industry when I was trying to figure out, okay, what am I supposed to do? Because like I said, if I'm going to investigate something, I investigate it. I don't just do it at a surface level. So, that's a very technical thing in terms of, well, you mitigate the threats and we calculate the risk and we do all these things. But over time, and as my systems awareness grew, and especially after I found the work of Russell Ackoff and his approach to soft systems theory, what I recognized is that, security, the way we're doing it is it's a thing, and it's somebody else's problem because it's a thing. We built departments for it. We built, tools for it. And that means that it's easy to offload and assume that somebody's got it covered, which of course is what gets us in trouble. But security isn't a thing, it's an outcome. And that's why I redefine security as the degree of confidence you have that you're going to get what you want. So that is kind of one leg of the sort of finding the soul, because then if it's not about security as a thing, it's about delivering outcomes, then how do you ensure those outcomes are right? And I mean, I've been an architect in some variety of another for, I mean, most of my career, either informally or informally, because I was always building things and designing things, you know, I won't get into all that now. But the point is that if you want to make sure you're going to get what you want, you have to design it, because you have to actually understand what needs to happen in what order, and that's architecture. I mean, any sort of plan to get something is an architecture, because any one of those pieces not being there means that you're not going to get what you want. So when you start looking at it from an objective point of view in terms of outcomes and architecture, and then it's like, well, the relationships between those things, that's a system, and a system is the function of the relationships and the interactions of the parts. And how do I manage that? Well, that's actually governance with a little g, not governance in terms of policies and functions and nations and whatever else. Those are just particular ways to do it. But again, cutting through everything else at a fundamental layer. So this is my definition of governance. Governance is the way we build and maintain relationships with ourselves and the world around us, and that includes our relationships with our ideas, the words we use, what we believe. I mean, all of that, it's all the same. So my relationship with my laptop and the organization and my family and what I believe is right in the world, from a systems point of view, you can look at these things the same way. And if you look at them the same way, that means that, well, if there's a simple model, then there's got to be a few levers. You know, if it's really a simple model, then everything really kind of condenses on this. And if you can figure out what that model is and how to manage it, well, then there is no other model. So it kind of strips away all of the noise and says, well, this is the essence. So it kind of comes all together, because everything is ultimately a governance problem. If you have trouble getting what you want, it's that you have not identified all of the things that are actually required, or you haven't structured them in the right way, or you haven't put it to where they interact with each other. So that's governance, and architecture is the structure of governance, and the outcome of governance is whatever the outcome is. It's either what you want or it isn't. And if it isn't, that means something in your architecture, your governance model, or your awareness of what it takes to get what you want is not in alignment with reality or the real world. I mean, that could be temporary and it could be accidental, so that it's going to come back and you're in fact right. Or it could be that, well, actually, what I believed or what I was told may have worked at a point in time or in a certain environment, or on a blue moon when the sky is orange or whatever, but it's not like that now. So what changed? If that changed, what else needs to change, if it's even possible for me to still achieve this objective? So this is how I look at security now. I mean, if we're not getting the objectives we want in security, what is that governance mesh? What do we need to change? What are the assumptions that we're making? And so that brings me to the first part of your questions. What are those some fundamental assumptions? Well, I think at the moment I've got 47 fundamental assumptions across governance, risk, compliance, security, architecture, that I've identified that nobody questions. And that's the thing. We're not getting what we want, and we're doubling down on what we think we know how to do, and we're still not getting what we want. And we've done the same thing for at least 25 years since the internet was connected to the world everywhere, and we're not getting the same results. So you'd think, with as many smart people as there are in the industry, and as much we've spent and done and looked and researched and all this, that if this was the solution, if this was really the governance mesh that delivered security, whatever that is, in 25 years, with how many million people and how many billions of dollars, we'd have cracked it. And we clearly cracked parts of it, but we haven't cracked it as a whole. And that's the problem. You don't optimize the performance of a system by optimizing the parts. You optimize the performance of how the parts work together so that you optimize the performance of the whole. If you optimize one part, in fact, it may actually work against you. And that's where we are today, because we're optimizing the technology part, ignoring everything else about how people interact, what the implications of that are, what the expectations are. And we're saying, oh, well, you just need more awareness, or you just need more security, or you just need to follow the health and hygiene rules. Well, policies and that doesn't change human behavior. Human behavior is very predictable. It takes the easiest path, and we're giving it a really hard path, and people aren't doing it, and then we're bitching at the people for not doing what we expect them to do, without saying, well, actually, if you've got to climb Everest every time you want to get a drink of water, what are you going to do? You're going to figure out a different way, because that's really hard.
So, if I was to kind of condense what you said, just to kind of reiterate back to you, there were three core things that I really pulled from what you just said. One is your definition of security. You talk about security as an outcome instead of looking at it as a thing of itself. And that outcome being an outcome of your governance model with a small g. Governance here being how someone has what their relationship is with self and with the world. And based on how strong or weak or aligned or misaligned your governance system is, security just becomes a byproduct of that. And by looking at governance as the root cause or the root lever of change, once that governance system switches, it switches how someone might respond in any environment, be it work, be it online, be it offline, be it relationships, be it family, where it all stems from that one point. So when we think of governance, and the assumptions that you mentioned there are 47 assumptions in the book. What would you say are the top three that, if you were to just snap over the top three that most starring, like stark, it's most stark everywhere you go, you see it, that come to your mind? What would those be?
Well, I suppose the first one is that we know what we're doing. That would be the first one. So if we believe that, then we're not going to question anything about what we're told is the right thing to do. And that gets us in the way, because we think we got it figured out. We know the tools, we know the skills, we know the activities, we know all the things that we're supposed to do. So, if we're not getting it, we're just not doing it right. So that holds us back. The next sort of really fundamental one is that all risk is fungible. And what I mean by fungible is that it's the same. Now, we inherited a risk module pretty much globally from the industry that's been doing risk the longest, and that's the insurance industry. So everything that we do and think and talk about risk today is really, you can trace it back to insurance and the actuarial data model and the probabilities and all of the risk calculation models and whatever. The problem is that if you look, again, part of systems thinking is, it's like, okay, if this is what it is, you can't answer why it's what it is from inside the system. The why always comes from outside. So if you looked at a car, you can't understand why, most cars are built for between, 5 and 7 people from taking a car apart. You could take a car apart forever to do that. You can't understand why in certain parts of the world people drive on one side of the car and other parts they drive. You can't get that from the car. You got to look at the larger systems that defined what a car was and what the requirements for a car were and how they were supposed to engage in that environment. So that means that if we want to take anything, but like I was talking about insurance and fungible risk, so, okay, well, that is what it is, but why is it that way? Then you've got to look at the environment in which that is actually practiced, and it's basically to run the business. So what is the business of insurance? It's moving money, and all money is the same. If you and I have $1 and we have it and we each want $1, why would I exchange my $1 for your dollar? Because they're the same. I can spend them. You can walk into a shop, buy something with $1 and I can, and it doesn't matter. I mean, that they have different serial numbers or that they are in different conditions of wear, they are equivalent in function. And so that's what fungibility means. So in insurance, what the real thing that is being managed is financial risk exposure or liquidity, and it's all about money. It's not about the events that cause problems that do the payouts or anything like that. It's just about, I have assessed a value according to this event, and I don't believe that event's going to happen. And if I get it wrong, well, then I have to pay you. It's like, going to the casino. You bet your money against the house, and if you win, the house gives you your equivalent money, and it's all about money. But the house doesn't give you a brand new car generally, or it doesn't give you a steak dinner, or it doesn't give you a bottle of Dom Perignon. That's what you do with the money that you actually get. So security is about operational risk, and that means it's the things that actually happen. So if operational risk was fungible and we did something like ransomware insurance, then when the bad guys wanted money, they would ransom the insurer and take the insurer out, not you, because you would have actually transferred the actual impact to your insurer. But that's not what happens. We are the one that's down. We are the ones whose customers can't do anything. We are the ones who's losing time based on projections that we say we're going to make $5,000 a second in whatever it is. So 10 seconds is $10,000. If I want to offset the $10,000, I've got to then, if I want it back in 10 seconds, then I've got to double my prior, throughput, or average it out over time, because time is the thing. That is the essence of operational risk. That's really what we're protecting. That we get the response we expect, but it's not just that we get it someday, it's that we get it when we want it. So if I am, wanting to go to, I don't know, Taylor Swift concert, since she was just in the news recently, right? And if my car breaks down and I'm stuck for 4 hours on the way to the Taylor Swift concert, well, I've missed it until the next one, right? I can't ever go to that Taylor Swift concert ever, but I was supposed to, but something that happened to me kept me from getting what I want. And the value of the ticket, yeah, you could refund my money, but you can't refund the experience. And so that shift gets us in basically most of the trouble we have. Arguments about quantitative versus qualitative, useless risk models, trying to talk about the ROI of security in ways that actually don't make any sense because they don't account for what really matters. This is some of the stuff that I talk about in the, operational risk section in the Invisible Crisis book, and opportunity cost of delay. We don't look at the opportunity cost. We look at the material cost and think that's it, when that is a part of it. But generally, it's such a small fraction of what the value that we've lost actually is supposed to be that we'll never see. That value that we've lost that we'll never see, that's what we're protecting. We are doing what we're doing to make sure that never happens. And if it happens, to eliminate that delay in delivery as quickly as we can. So those were only two, but it covers a lot of stuff. So.
Those two you see as the overarching paradigms. One being that we know what we are doing, and therefore there is a lot of resistance to things that are innovative, especially because this industry comes with a lot of risk. So trying something new, trying something different comes with itself with pretty high consequences if it doesn't work. And I'm assuming that that is a huge part of the resistance, as opposed to the AI space where things are moving and things are changing very fast. So that is one thing we are definitely dealing with. And how risk is looked at and how risk is actually calculated. If it was calculated taking things like opportunity cost and time into consideration, then decisions would be made very differently. How resources are allocated would be very different than just looking at the material cost of like the technology, infrastructure, or insurance that is currently like the focus. So, coming back to governance that
Well,
you talked.
actually, just sorry if I can interrupt you 1 second. So the third one that would make more sense and kind of close the loop is that security comes from controls. So if we have enough controls, what are the controls there for? Well, the controls are to mitigate the threats or patch the vulnerabilities. So this is why we get into this cycle of being overly focused on threats, because we think that the controls are about the threats, and most of the controls we have aren't about the impact. So we spend all of our time focused on, oh, there's a new threat. Oh, some APT went bump in the night and we've got to do something differently. Or, oh, because we've deployed this new technology, it completely changes our risk exposure. No, those are ways that things can happen, but the thing that happens is still the same. If my technology fails, then I don't get the value of that technology in the moment that I expect it to happen. It doesn't matter if it's ransomware, it doesn't matter if it's buffer overflow, it doesn't matter if somebody bumps against the on switch. It's not there when I need it, and that's actually the real impact, and that's what we can't replace. We can't get that back. So the third one is that if we have the controls are there for threats, and this is because again they all fit together. They're kind of what Rustlakoff calls a mess, a system of related problems that compound into a, a situation, and that is what we've got. Every one of those fundamental flawed assumptions kind of isn't by itself, and you can't address it in isolation. It's the interaction of it with all the other ones and the way people make decisions that causes problems, which again brings it back to, well, managing that mess is what? Identifying the parts, the way those parts interact, and understanding how I can influence those interactions to move it more towards where I want so that I've got leverage. So what is that? Well, that's governance.
So, governance essentially is the ability to manipulate, when I say manipulate, to influence the various components in this mesh, which seems to be a messy mesh of problems kind of reiterating and reinforcing themselves. And then we create a problem, then we create a different solution for that problem. That solution creates another problem, then we're creating another solution for that problem, but it's not actually solving the first problem. And so we are now reached this point where there is so much exhaustion of not really knowing where originally did we start, where did things go wrong, and how do we backtrack and actually move forward in a way that creates systems that can handle the plethora of threats and risks that we are going to and we currently are already seeing, especially at the advent of emerging technologies, AI, quantum computing, all of that. So, going back to that governance model and looking at that, you're saying that's your argument that there can be a lot of solutions that come from the right governance.
Correct.
In the model of governance that you've created, you mentioned you mentioned two terms. You mentioned collapse and you mentioned traction. Can you explain what you mean by that and what are like what is your in your mind the ideal form of governance? What is that right form of governance that can actually start moving the needle?
Okay. Let me see how I can answer this in a succinct way.
Can I ask put a question just to kind of clarify that? Can you paint a picture of what a collapse looks like and what traction looks like in
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. So fundamentally, I mean, yeah. So let's start there and work backwards. So traction is basically what it sounds like. It's forward movement, and there's varying levels of that. From I'm kind of getting small wins to, everything's going my way and I'm just in the zone and flow, and I'm just focused on the outcome or the experience that I have. So traction it's a spectrum, I guess, of where things start working to everything is just like magic. It everything is going exactly as you expect. And then collapse is the opposite. So as soon as something doesn't go the way you want, then you have to make a decision. It pulls you out, your attention away from what you were focused on or what was important to you to some new problem. So collapse is really the it starts with a problem or an expectation not being met, or and that can manifest in a number of different ways. Somebody doesn't do what they say they're going to do. Piece of equipment isn't where you expect it to be. Piece of equipment doesn't work the way you expect. um, the weather doesn't cooperate the way you were dressed for sun, and it suddenly downpours with hail and whatever, and you're drenched. Any of those things, that is a collapse. And so collapse is the point from which that expectation not being met happens, to you being able to deal with it sufficiently that you can get back to dealing with what you were supposed to or wanted to be doing instead. So again, there's a spectrum from, I'm in a meeting, and I don't know, not everybody has kids, but anybody who has kids or pets has experienced this. I'm in a meeting and suddenly it's like, Papa, it's like, so you were in one thing and your expectation was that you were not going to be disturbed. And here is the child or the dog or the spouse or the partner or whatever with an urgent need that then, okay, this is a situation. Now, it can be a serious situation, or it can be just an interruption. But again, you deal with it and you move on, and then you get back to what you're doing. So that whole thing of going from I'm in one state or zone or frame of reference or activity to that I'm interrupted and I have to deal with that interruption so that I can get back, that dealing with the interruption is the spectrum of collapse. And so the problem is that a lot of people, if you look from a psychology point of view, a lot of people, when collapse happen, they are not prepared for it, and they forget one thing, which is fundamentally the definition of control that everybody has. And this is a universal definition. And the definition of control that I learned from legendary negotiator Jim Camp was anything you can start and stop at will. So that has some implications. It means that it's got to be under your direct control, because it's got to be able to start and stop at your will. And you have to be the one that is taking the initiative to start and stop something. And so that gives you a boundary of control pretty immediately and directly. And it also has several indications. It then says, well, anything in this boundary of control, anything that I can start and stop at will, that I have a guarantee or a reasonable guarantee that that's what's going to happen, well, then that is actually something that I can influence and really act on and do something about. And that's really where the concept of agency comes from, because agency is, taking ownership and responsibility of your actions and what you can and can't do, and recognizing that. So then anything outside that boundary, well, that's just influence, or maybe no influence whatsoever. I can't control the weather from sitting here at my desk, but I'm affected by it. So I can either get upset about the weather, or I can recognize that, well, it's going to do what it's going to do, and I need to be able to adapt and prepare for that situation and those things. So governance then becomes about the recognition of and internalizing what you can and can't control, because this influences the way you respond to situations and events. So collapse is just an event, and your behavior is the decisions you make about how you respond to those events. So what you do, are you going to blame somebody and hope that they fix it? Are you going to just kind of get mad and stop doing anything because you're upset or you're flustered or anxious or whatever? Or are you going to sort of recognize it because you expected that that could happen? It looked like it was going to rain. I brought my umbrella. It starts to rain. I put open my umbrella and I still walk to work. And yeah, okay, I might be a little damp, but at least I was prepared and it's not a major thing. Whereas if you're dressed for the beach and suddenly it starts snowing, that's kind of a major thing because you're completely unprepared and it's going to have a bigger impact and it's going to take you longer to respond to it because you don't have the resources you need available. So governance then is really the way that you manage and establish these relationships based on what you can and can't control. So the ultimate form of governance is to recognize that everybody has the same fundamental boundaries of control, whatever they are. I mean, yours are going to be different than mine, Shimona, but you still have a set and I still have a set, and they're very similar because we have access to the same things, our environment, computers, technology, people, whatever. But then we need to understand that we can't control the things that we think we ought to or that we might like to, and therefore act accordingly. So everything then turns into a negotiation. And again, I studied Jim Camp's method, so this is all kind of influenced by him very much, which his definition of negotiation or a negotiated agreement is an agreement between two or more parties where each party retains the right to veto at any time, even after it's agreed or whatever. But basically, you know, one of his books is Start with No, because his point is that the negotiation doesn't start with a question. The negotiation starts when somebody establishes a boundary and says no. And you then are reaching an agreement with them to either maintain that boundary or change that boundary based on whatever is, mutually beneficial to you. So if you look at governance, each one of these relationships is a negotiated agreement that can be vetoed. So it's just an expectation. If you can't control it, then you're relying on your assumptions or expectations of something doing what you expect it to do. And if it doesn't do it, well, that's just a veto. And then you need to renegotiate your agreement with that thing. And that's a process.
So can you give a real life example in your experience, maybe at work or and obviously because we are looking at this from a security lens. Can you give a real life example on how collapse or traction could have been created in a governance system, or how that has affected security
Yeah.
at any of the projects that you were part of?
Yeah. I mean, and so the again, to understand what I'm saying, you've got to maybe suspend your own assumptions about what governance is, but you have to understand that all of these governance relationships exist because you are in a system of systems. If you really believe systems thinking is a valid way to look at the world, you are in a system of systems all the time. Which ones of those you're conscious of is going to vary based on whatever. And so if governance is the understanding, management, and influence and operation of these systems, the ones that you know about, that means that every interaction is a part of some governance system. So with that as the foundation, so governance isn't just a thing based on I'm governing my whatever. No, governance happens whether you're aware of it or not. That is, you are a participant in multiple overlapping interconnected governance meshes every second of every day of your entire life. So with that as kind of the floor, then let's talk about the most common collapse scenario in security, a security incident. So what is a security incident really? Well, a security incident is something that is an exception, right? It is a situation you may have planned for, but you kind of hoped you didn't have to deal with, right? So if there are no incidents, what is the state of your environment? Well, it's working the way you expect it to do. All the systems are working. All of my security controls are working. People are doing what I expect them to do. They're following the policy. The bad guys are doing what I expect them to do. And so, because they're doing exactly what I expected them to do, they're hitting the controls that I put in place to prevent them from doing what they're trying to do. Everything is swimming, right? This is flow. And then something happens that you don't expect, right? And then the bad guys get in, or a system goes down, or files are encrypted. Well, that's just collapse. Yeah.
Not to interrupt, but I actually would like to put up the image of
Oh,
the
okay. Sure.
that you shared. So, like, as you're speaking about it, it's something that
Sure.
can be
So
looked at.
here's kind of the at risk of overload for everybody, but this is the full picture. And so the governance mesh. Well, start with the one in the bottom first. The mesh. Yeah. So basically, if you kind of look at it from the perspective of achieving an outcome, then these are the governance elements that are most important to manage if you want to manage your execution of an outcome. So you've got your assumptions and beliefs, what you've been told, your knowledge and skills of how to do stuff, people and resources, the things you're going to do, the actions you're going to take, the environment in which those actions are taken. And one of two things is going to happen. I mean, it's really binary. You either get what you want, or some portion of what you want, or you don't. And so you can even take that portion of and say, well, I know even if I get 50% of this, that I'm okay. Well, so then it's binary. It's just that it's binary at 50% rather than at 100%. And so anything more than 50%, you get what you want. Anything less than 50%, you don't. So it's still back to only two outcomes. And so the thing is that every individual has a state because there is that boundary of what they can control. And every one of these relationships independently has a state. So now if you zoom out, and there's a relationship between the colors of the lines and the colors of the things in the model, in the mesh. So if you zoom out, and the one on the left then is the collapsed attraction model, which was actually first. And it describes this, I mentioned there were spectrums of traction and there were spectrums of collapse. Well, it turns out that there are basically 6 sections in that cycle, and this is a never-ending cycle. And so as you move through collapse, you go through fracture and destabilization, and you're trying to figure things out, and then you've got an idea, and you put that idea into practice, and then if that works, then you get ignition, and then if it keeps working, then you get traction, and then if it really works, then, well, hey, let's formalize it, let's make a system out of it, let's implement it, automate it, let's do whatever. So then that structure, and then once that's done, then you don't have to worry about it anymore because you've automated it, or you've got the system, or it's integrated into your house or whatever, your office, your business, your technology, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. And the you don't have to worry about it anymore, quote unquote, that's flow. Anytime you have to worry about something, you're not in flow if that something is essential or in the way of you doing whatever it is you're trying to do. And then again, the other point of this is that it's not flow and, hey, I'm there, I'm done, I don't have to worry about it, I'm job done. No, because everything always changes, because you only control you, basically, and the things you can directly control. So what causes you to be pulled from flow? Well, it's back to that mesh. And then we go to the model on the right, and it's about the relationships, because one of those relationships isn't where I expect it to be. So somebody has, injected something into my application as an SQL injection, and I didn't expect that to happen. So my assumption about my relationship with that application has now been vetoed, because the attacker has done something that they weren't supposed to do. And so now I've got a problem. So I need to renegotiate my relationship with my application that has just been subject to a SQL injection attack, and it's vetoed. So I got to figure out what actually happened. So that's the evaluation phase. Then I need to figure out what I can do about what happened. And that's what I call a rupture. It's that moment of clarity that actually gets you unstuck and allows you to move forward. And then you fix it. That's the negotiation. Well, if I try this, does that work? Well, no. If I, maybe I put this control, no, they just went around that. Oh, maybe, I can stop them here. No, they've already done lateral movement. So until you've renegotiated your agreement with whatever it is, then you haven't achieved an agreement that you can then build on. So you reach an agreement and then you implement that agreement, and then if it's implemented, then you have alignment. And the relationship is that the individual in the middle of the mesh, their maximum sustainable state is governed by the maximum level of negotiation integrity of the relationships that they're in. So if I have, 3 relationships that are critical for me getting what I want, like my infrastructure is down, my application is no longer under my control, and my data has been compromised, all of those have been violated now because of this exploiter attack. Well, the maximum sustainable flow I can have is I got to solve this problem. So I'm in fracture, I'm in collapse because what I depend on is in collapse. And until I solve that, I might be able to make progress, but I can't continue progress until I solve this relationship. So that's what the text at the bottom does. But the point is that they are separate but related. And this is actually a model that works for instance, for your relationships, life itself. I haven't, because it's just an explanation and a formalization for soft systems theory. Akoff never went this far. None of them have gone this far quite, because this is an integration of psychology and human behavior and soft systems thinking in a way that most people don't even know. Most people stop at system dynamics, which is what Senge talked about or what Forrester invented. Or they think systems engineering is all of systems thinking, but systems engineering isn't really systems thinking. It's just still, you define a top and then you decompose that top and then you bring it back with the V model, but you never actually look at, well, this thing as a system within larger systems. This is the system. This is my analytical decomposition of the system to make it work. And then I'm verifying that it works. And so I have verified up and down, but I'm still in one circle rather than recognizing that any circle is one of millions. So
You
I don't
know,
know if that was clear or not, but that's the way it works.
something very stark that this model reminds me of is what, like you mentioned, even behavior. So it's like security behavior, right? Where say we're training someone, an employee on with security awareness training on, okay, these are the correct protocols that you need to follow. Now you are building traction because say someone has, found the right kind of practice, seems like it works, it has been implemented as a structure or a system, like multi-factor authentication, or verify when you get an email from your CEO saying that you need to buy a gift card. Okay, so that structure has been set. In the everyday life of an employee, when everything is hunky-dory, things are going good, they might actually be extremely compliant. They might be in flow, which is, things are smooth, they're compliant, they're being careful about what they do, all of that, until a point where something goes wrong. Say, for example, they just found out they're getting a divorce, or their kids are leaving, or something disastrous, that their pet died, right? Or they something happened and it has completely like shaken them. Now suddenly they come to work, but their mind space is different, and now their manager is after them, to get something done, and they're trying to sit and focus, but they can't because they have their three or four other colleagues coming in and asking for this and that and that. And what that creates is a rupture of attention, of being able to think critically, of even efficiency and speed. And boom, that person goes into this collapse stage where there is some form of a fracture, where, say, he or she is now highly vulnerable and extremely emotional. And when they are in that state, a social engineer can, probably by fluke, sometimes if it's spear or veil phishing, it is extremely intentional, it's actually induced, but can leverage that and amplify it using manipulation tactics that causes complete destabilization. That
Correct.
destabilization ruptures how someone would otherwise normally think and act in a, in their traction stage, to now suddenly commit to actions and behaviors that seem completely out of everything that they have ever been trained on. And that reaches a point where now they have faced a consequence, they wake up and they're like, oh shit, pardon my French, but I messed up. This is what happened. Oh my God, we need to do something about it. I need to go and report it to my department right now so that we can put in something in action. And boom, it kind of starts moving back to problem solving and traction. So it's very interesting as you were talking about it, how I'm thinking of just the mind state of someone who has undergone a scam or has undergone fraud. And, you know, then the goal becomes, can we measure where someone is and create systems that, when they are in a collapse stage, instead of going all the way through, brings them back from
Well, you've
here.
got to go. Yeah, but you got to go. It's a cycle. You can't skip steps. So the thing is, what you're actually after is moving through it as quickly as possible. And that's what the difference is between the inside of the circle and the outside of the circle is. So if you are in victim consciousness roles, so this is transactional analysis stuff here and the drama triangle roles. If you are in blame mode, or you are not, you have forgotten your agency, that you actually control more than most people realize on any given point, then you're going to get stuck here for a long time, because you are going to be waiting for somebody to fix it or solve the problem, or you're going to blame people. And every moment you spend blaming somebody else is actually a moment that you could have been doing something to solve the problem or address it, independently of them. And so the key is, you want to stay in these traction roles of observer, asserter, or nurturer as much as possible, even in collapse. And it's a skill, it's practice. But it's less about, I mean, this is the individual, yes, but every one of those things you mentioned, their partner, their job, their self-image, they're all, back to the governance mesh, they're all items in that mesh. So every one of those has a different state, and every moment is a prioritization exercise between which one of these elements in my mesh is going to get more of my attention than all of the other ones. So
Mhm.
in the collapse scenario that you did, my relationship or my emotional state or my self-image, because I feel like I'm a failure as a partner or whatever, because they did this, or I feel like that, whatever. But that's a self-image veto or challenge that's actually making them vulnerable. And so you can expand this. And I mean, I've shared with you some of the more expanded ones, but it's really about, you can't control what anybody else does. You can only control how you respond to it. Again, it's stuff we can start and stop at will. Can you start and stop anybody from, reacting a certain way or feeling a certain way? No. The only person you can start and stop doing that is you. So you've either got to accept that and give them the right and the agency to veto and be prepared for it, and not let that interrupt you or any more than possible, so that I can complete this cycle as quickly as I can to get back where I need to be. But you can't skip steps.
Interesting. So then the goal is not to skip this, it's to move faster through it. And
Exactly.
that's really interesting. It makes me think of how we create incentive systems or culture of security within a company, where if the culture is punishment and reprimanding someone for making a mistake, then they're probably stuck over here
You
much longer.
betcha. You
And
betcha.
they're incentivized to report things fast because they would be rewarded for it and they would not be reprimanded for it, then it's easier for someone to go faster through it and take action and report it immediately. So when we are talking then about culture and building culture, what we're trying to measure is how fast someone can move through the cycle to come back out into traction.
Exactly.
Very interesting. So I know we're, close to time. I mean, I have so many questions for you, obviously, in terms of, how do you measure success of this model in a system, like within an organization, if they were to implement it? Um, and if a CISO is listening right now, or someone who has the position and authority to really drive change in governance systems and management systems in their company, if they're listening right now, what's the very first step that they should take or they can take tomorrow to start applying this paradigm within their role?
Okay. So this one I'm going to ask or answer in order. So the first question you asked was about applying this. This is fundamental core theory. It's not necessarily, it is under everything that I talk about and do, but I don't generally lead with this other than the idea of governance and agency and control. So the thing that they can do tomorrow is not actually worry about the details of what's on the screen, but the implications of what we've been talking about. To be able to say, okay, the next time that you don't have the outcome that you want, scroll up just a little bit, it is this mesh at the bottom with, no, the show the mesh. There you go. This is what's going on. So if the next time you don't get the result that you want, what we normally do is we blame the people, or we blame the resources, or we blame the activities that we did. We're just not good enough. We're not fast enough. We're not doing the right things. And what we don't question are the gray lines. We don't question, is the environment supportive to what I want to do? Is it actually doing what I expect it to do? Or is it different than my expectations? We don't question as often the knowledge and skills. Well, do I really have the skills that I need to solve this problem? Because if I don't ask the question, I mean, the answer may be yes, but if I don't ask the question, I won't know if the answer is no. But the biggest one is the other one, which is what I've told I have to do to get something that I want. Are we actually challenging our assumptions and expectations about, if I do this, I will get X? There's a whole nother conversation we could have in any level of detail about the difference between cause and effect, which is what everybody's taught. If I do this, I'm going to get this outcome. But that's not how reality works, because you are part of this system of systems. That's only two parts. There's a bunch of stuff. And so it's really a producer product relationship. And the producer product relationship is encoded in this mesh. Because if I want to get the result I expect, every one of those lines needs to be basically in flow, or at least in the traction side of the equation, so that it's doing more or less what I expect. Because if any one of them breaks, every one of those is an essential part for getting an outcome. So tomorrow, you could take this picture, screenshot it now, and every time you have a problem, walk around that picture. Is my environment correct? Did I do the right thing? Do I have the resources I expect? Did those resources work the way I expect? Do I have the people? Did the people do what I expected them to do? Do I have the skills? Do I have the knowledge? You know, am I challenging my assumptions? Is this really something that is supposed to happen if everything else is right? Or is this something that I've just been told and everybody struggles with and it's not just me? Is the result that I expect actually even possible? Because something has changed in any one of these other things. My environment changes, you know, because we have been told for the last 200 years that reductionism and analytical thinking is what we need. We solve by divide and conquer. We break it into parts and we figure out the parts and we optimize those parts. And if we optimize the parts and we put them back together, then that's going to be what that's all we need. But that's not true, because that comes from a couple of things. But yes, it's the basis of the scientific method. But one of the best things I ever heard Russell Acuff say in one of my favorite talks of his is, well, okay, think about science. Every law of science, what is the first principle that is basically, he didn't say it this way, but the disclaimer get out clause for every one of those things? Well, in a vacuum or in a controlled environment. So all of science is based on establishing relationships outside of the real world. And therefore, when you introduce the real world, if the real world isn't sufficiently close to the laboratory environment in which these laws were developed, then, hey, who knows what's going to happen? And that's the problem with frameworks. That's the problem with our tools. Do they work? Yes. Do we really understand all of the things that have to be aligned? What ducks have to be in a row? Beyond the use of the framework, beyond the ticking the magic maturity model boxes, beyond picking the right vendors and controls and putting them in the right place? Do we have the right relationships? Do we work together the right way? Do we actually work in an environment where the culture is working against us? And, all those things, but we don't think about it. But if you look at it through this lens, you will.
I I really love what you just said about how science at its core has been so focused on reductionist and analytical thinking that systems and I mean I don't know what's the opposite of that. Essentially it's abstract systems thinking that connects everything together and sees things with regards to all the variables that are at.
Deterministic reductionism is what you're looking for. So
What's the
it's
word?
system, it's systems thinking, which is expansive and interconnected and non-deterministic, versus deterministic reductionism, which is the basic opposite of it. The thing is, you need both. It's not one or the other. But if you only pick one, just expansionism, you're not going to be able to do anything. You're going to figure out why things should be working the way they are, but you won't be able to actually implement anything in that environment. So you need reductionism. It's not bad, but you need to be able to go back and forth as quick and as often as you have between the two fluidly. And that's what we don't teach. And that's the one thing that Acuff teaches that is different than almost everybody else in the systems thinking field that I've ever read is talking about, because it's not analysis versus synthesis. So analysis is taking things apart, and synthesis is putting the thing in the larger whole of, as a part of something else. It's not one or the other. It's you got to have both, but you got to know which one you need at any time to answer which questions. If you want to answer why questions, that's synthesis, because you can't answer why questions from within the thing you're doing. If you want to know how something works, or the knowledge and information or details or parts, well, that's analysis. Yeah, I got to take it apart. But the other magic of this is that, well, once I take it apart, I don't have to group those parts the same way anybody else does. If it makes more sense for me to group them for what I'm trying to achieve or what I'm trying to think about, or what, I can regroup those parts any infinite number of ways, because they're all part of the same system. They're all connected, and there's a path between any two parts. So how I group them into larger subsystems or parts doesn't actually matter. So that's the other. So architecture is really two things. It's a classification exercise. And then it is, as a function of that classification exercise, how do I group things together in the right way to see the most important relationships and interactions to get the most leverage, to have the most influence over the outcome that I want? That's all architecture is. And it's not about models and things and building blocks and capabilities and all that crap. It's about systems. It is the way you arrange and design systems, and it's all a design exercise. And it is that endless cycle between analysis and synthesis until you get it solid and right to where you think, because as soon as you think, well, that's the rupture, and then you're back to ignition, and then you're back around, or it doesn't work, and hey, well, that's collapse. Damn, that didn't work. How do I restructure it? How do I look at it a little differently? It really is all the same.
I love that. And I know that you go much deeper into all the components of how this system functions and works and what this architecture looks like in your book, which will be linked to this video as well, the URL to that book. So definitely go check it out. But thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing this model. And I'm very curious and excited to see how we can start shifting the paradigm of governance in security and the systems around how we even mitigate human risk by enabling and empowering humans to optimize their own internal governance models, which is what the byproduct of secure behavior actually is. Okay, so that was Andrew Townley helping us rethink what security really means at its core. And if today's conversation left you questioning old assumptions and seeing security through a new lens, that's exactly the point. Thank you for joining me and Andrew on the Mindshield podcast. And if you found this valuable, share it. If you found you had any questions, anything that you disagree with, feel free to bring that and comment and talk about it. This topic that we're exploring is new, and there is a lot of coalition of different fields that we can bring together to really start figuring out how to put it in practice to really change and move the needle in how security is being designed right now and for the future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shimana.